The Velthari Dominion had ruled 3,000 star systems for 10,000 years. Their ships were beautiful things made of living crystal that could grow and heal itself. Each warship stretched 4 kilometers across the dark of space. They were powered by captured black holes and armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. No species had ever defeated them. No species had ever tried. When Velthari scouts discovered a small human colony on the edge of their territory, they did not bother with diplomacy. They did not ask questions. They simply sent a message to the humans that said 2 words: leave or die. The humans had been on that world for only 3 years. They had farms and small cities. They had children in schools and old people in hospitals. They had built homes and planted trees. They were not soldiers. They were families trying to make a new life among the stars. Ambassador Kethvorin was given the honor of delivering the Dominion's ultimatum in person. He brought 47 warships with him. This was considered extreme overkill for a colony of 2 million humans, but Kethvorin wanted to make an impression. He wanted the humans to see what real power looked like. His fleet surrounded the planet in a perfect formation. Crystal ships gleamed in the light of the local sun. Each one was a masterpiece of Velthari engineering. Each one could destroy cities with a single shot. Kethvorin sat in his command chair and waited for the humans to beg for mercy. 3 weeks passed. The humans sent no response, no surrender, no negotiation, nothing. Kethvorin was annoyed. He ordered his communication officer to broadcast the ultimatum again. Still nothing. He was about to order a demonstration strike on one of the smaller settlements when his sensor officer made a strange sound. A ship had just entered the system. A human ship. Kethvorin leaned forward with interest. Finally, he thought, the humans had sent someone to negotiate their surrender. He ordered the ship's image displayed on the main screen. What he saw made him laugh out loud. The human vessel was tiny. It measured barely 400 meters from front to back. His own flagship was 12 kilometers long. The human ship would fit inside his cargo bay with room to spare, but it was not just the size that made Kethvorin laugh. It was how ugly the thing was. The hull was gray and dull, covered in patches of different colored metal that had clearly been welded on at different times. There was no elegance to its design, no beauty. It looked like someone had taken spare parts from a dozen different ships and forced them together with brute strength and bad welding. The ship moved slowly toward the fleet. It did not try to run. It did not try to hide. It just kept coming, straight toward the center of the Velthari formation. Kethvorin ordered a full broadcast to the entire Dominion. He wanted billions of viewers to see this moment. He wanted them to laugh along with him at human stupidity. The human ship stopped a short distance from his flagship. Its name was painted on the side in simple white letters. U.S. Persistence. A communication request came through. Kethvorin accepted it with amusement. The face that appeared on his screen was not what he expected. The human was female, older, with gray in her dark hair and scars across her face. Her eyes were the color of cold steel and they held no fear. None at all. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth ship Persistence," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "I am here to respond to your ultimatum." Kethvorin spread his arms wide, gesturing at the massive fleet surrounding her tiny vessel. "This is your response? One ship? One broken freighter against the might of the Velthari Dominion?" Laughter erupted across his bridge. Officers pointed at the screen and made jokes. Some laughed so hard they had to hold on to their stations for support. The sound echoed through every Velthari ship in the fleet. Captain Vasquez did not smile. She did not react at all. She simply waited for the laughter to fade. "We do not want war," she said when the bridge was quiet again. "But you need to leave this system. These people are under the protection of Earth." Laughter. Kethvorin wiped tears from his compound eyes. This was the best entertainment he had experienced in centuries. "Protection?" he repeated. "You. In that thing?" He gestured at the ugly human ship. "My shuttlecraft has more firepower than your vessel. My personal transport is larger. What protection can you possibly offer?" "I am asking you politely," Vasquez said. Her voice had not changed. Still calm? Still steady. Take your fleet and leave. Do not come back. These colonists have done nothing to threaten the Dominion. They just want to live in peace. Kethvorin stopped laughing. Something in the human's voice bothered him. She was not afraid. She should be terrified. She should be begging. Instead, she spoke as if she were the one in control. You have one cycle to retreat, Kethvorin said coldly. When the sun rises again on your little colony, we will begin our attack. Your ugly ship will be the first thing we destroy. Then we will burn your cities one by one. This is what happens to species that do not respect the Dominion. Captain Vasquez nodded slowly. Understood. One cycle. The transmission ended. Kethvorin turned to his officers with a smile. Make sure the recording of this conversation reaches every corner of the Dominion. Let everyone see how foolish these humans are. Tomorrow, we will give them a lesson they will never forget. His officers cheered, but one of them, a young sensor operator, was still watching her screens. The human ship had not moved. It sat perfectly still in the void, its running lights dim, its engines cold. Commander, she said quietly, I am detecting unusual energy readings from the human vessel. Something in its core is... I do not know how to describe it. It is like nothing in our database. Kethvorin waved his hand dismissively. Old reactors always give strange readings. That ship is probably held together with hope and prayers. By tomorrow, it will be dust. He did not look at the Persistence again. Inside the human ship, Captain Vasquez walked through the corridors to the heart of the vessel. Her crew of 847 men and women stood at their stations, quiet and focused. They had all volunteered for this mission. They all knew they might not survive it. She reached the reactor room and placed her hand on the door. Behind this door was something that should not exist. Something humans had found in a place they should never have gone. Something terrible and powerful and alive. They chose violence, Vasquez said to no one in particular. They always choose violence. She opened the door deep inside the Persistence. Something ancient and hungry began to wake up. The sun rose over the human colony. Farmers left their homes to work in the fields. Children walked to schools. Life continued as normal because there was nothing else to do. The colonists knew the Velthari fleet hung above them in orbit. They knew what was coming, but they also knew that Earth had sent a ship to protect them. One ship against 47? They tried to have hope anyway in orbit. Ambassador Kethvorin finished his morning meal and walked to the command bridge of his flagship. His officers were already at their stations. The fleet had arranged itself into a crescent formation, a shape designed to focus all firepower on a single point. It was the formation the Dominion used when they wanted to make absolutely certain something died. The human ship had not moved. It floated near the planet, alone and silent. Its running lights were still dim. Its engines were still cold. It looked dead already. Are we being recorded? Kethvorin asked. Yes, Commander. The entire Dominion is watching. Kethvorin smiled. This would be a moment for the history books. The day humanity learned its place in the galaxy. The day the Dominion reminded everyone why they ruled 3,000 stars. Open fire, he said. 47 ships attacked at once. Plasma lances cut through the void, bright as suns. Graviton beams bent space itself into weapons. Antimatter torpedoes streaked toward the human vessel in swarms of deadly light. The combined firepower was enough to crack a moon in half. It was enough to sterilize an entire continent. It was more than enough to destroy one tiny, ugly ship. The space around the Persistence turned white with destruction. Energy readings went off every scale. Sensors burned out trying to record the devastation. Kethvorin watched with satisfaction. This was what happened to species that defied the Dominion. This was the price of arrogance. The light faded. The energy dispersed. Sensors came back online. The Persistence was still there, scratched, undamaged, unchanged. Kethvorin stood up from his chair so fast he knocked it over. That is impossible. Check the sensors. They must be damaged. Sensors are working correctly, Commander, his tactical officer said. His voice was shaking. The human ship absorbed the attack. All of it. every beam, every torpedo, every joule of energy we threw at it. Persistence's hull was glowing now. Not with damage. The glow was coming from those ugly welded plates that covered its surface. They were drinking in energy like a sponge drinks water. Those patches were not repairs at all. They were something else. Something the Velthri had never seen before. Something that turned their weapons into food. "Commander," the sensor officer whispered, "the human ship is moving." Persistence did not accelerate like a normal vessel. It did not build up speed gradually. It simply vanished from one location and appeared in another. One moment it was in front of the fleet. The next moment it was between two Velthri cruisers. Before anyone could react, the human ship released the energy it had absorbed. A focused pulse of pure destruction shot out in both directions. The two cruisers crumpled like paper toys in the hands of an angry child. Their beautiful crystal hulls shattered into a billion glittering fragments. The ship simply ceased to exist. The Persistence vanished again. It appeared next to another pair of ships. Another pulse. Two more dead vessels. Again, two more. Again, two more. "Retreat," Kethvorin screamed. "All ships retreat now." But the Persistence was not finished. It jumped through the fleet like a ghost made of fire. Each time it appeared, it struck with perfect precision. It did not attack randomly. It targeted specific systems. Engines, command bridges, weapon arrays. Every shot was placed exactly where it would do the most damage. The Velthri fleet was trained for war. They had conquered species that fought back with everything they had, but they had never faced anything like this. They could not hit the human ship. They could not predict where it would appear next. They could only watch their comrades die and wait for their turn. 11 minutes. That was how long the battle lasted. In 11 minutes, 31 Velthri ships were disabled. Their crews floated in broken holes waiting for rescue. 16 more ships were destroyed completely. No survivors. No wreckage. Just dust spreading slowly through the void. The Persistence returned to its original position near the planet. Its hull still glowed faintly with stored energy. It looked exactly the same as before. The ugly patches, the dull gray metal, the welded repairs that were not repairs at all. Kethvorin stared at the human ship from his damaged bridge. Fires burned around him. His officers lay dead or dying at their stations. Sparks flew from broken consoles. The smell of smoke filled the air. A communication request appeared on his one working screen. He accepted it with trembling hands. Captain Vasquez looked the same as before. Calm, steady, unafraid. But now Kethvorin understood why she had shown no fear. She had known all along what would happen. She had tried to warn him. He had laughed at her. "That was your first lesson," Vasquez said. Her voice was almost gentle. "Humanity does not build pretty ships. We build nightmares. Leave this system. Do not come back." Kethvorin could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He had just watched his fleet torn apart by something that should not exist. He had just learned that everything he believed about human weakness was wrong. "I am letting you live so you can deliver a message," Vasquez continued. "Tell the Dominion what happened here. Tell them that this colony is under our protection. Tell them that the next ship we send will not be as patient as I am." She paused and leaned closer to the camera. "And tell them that this is the smallest ship in our fleet." The transmission ended. Kethvorin gave the order to retreat. His surviving ships limped away from the planet as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. No one spoke. No one tried to make jokes now. They had all seen the same thing. They had all learned the same lesson. The recording of the battle spread across the Dominion within hours. Billions watched. Billions saw their mighty fleet humiliated by a single ugly ship. Billions saw the ambassador who had laughed at humanity run away like a frightened child in the Dominion capital. The ruling council met in emergency session. They had not lost a battle in 5,000 years. This was more than a defeat. This was an insult to everything they believed about themselves. An insult to their history. An insult to their pride. They began planning immediately. They would not send 47 ships next time. They would send thousands. They would bring weapons that could destroy stars. They would tear this human ship apart and burn every human world to ash. The Dominion did not forget insults. The Dominion did not forgive, and in orbit above the colony, Captain Vasquez watched the Velthari fleet disappear into the distance. She allowed herself a small smile. The colonists were safe. For now, but she knew this was not over. She knew what the Dominion would do next. She knew that they would come back with everything they had. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. The Persistence had won today. But the ship's true capabilities had barely been tested. The weapon that slept in its core had only been awakened for a moment. Next time, she might have to wake it fully. She hoped the Dominion would be smart. She hoped they would accept defeat and leave humanity alone. But she knew they would not. Pride was a terrible thing. It made people do stupid things. It made empires fall. She walked back to her command chair and sat down. "Prepare for the next engagement," she said to her crew. "They will be back. And next time, there will be a lot more of them." 3 months passed. The human colony continued to grow. More settlers arrived from Earth. New buildings rose from the ground. Children who had been afraid now played in the streets without fear. The people began to believe they were safe. But Captain Vasquez knew better. She kept the Persistence in orbit, watching and waiting. Her crew rotated down to the surface for rest, but she rarely left the ship. She spent her nights studying reports from Earth's intelligence network. She watched the Dominion gather its forces. She counted ships. The numbers grew larger every day. Supreme Commander Yethanara had been given command of the largest military force the Dominion had assembled in 10,000 years. They called it the Purification Armada. 2,000 warships gathered at the edge of Dominion space. Each one was larger than any vessel in the human fleet. Each one was crewed by officers who had sworn to avenge the shame of the first battle. But the true terror of the Armada was the special weapons it carried. 12 planet crackers, massive vessels designed to break worlds apart. And at the center of the formation floated the flagship Eternal Crystalline. It was so large that it had its own gravity well. Smaller ships orbited it like moons orbiting a planet. Yethanara was not like Keth Vorin. She did not laugh at her enemies. She did not make jokes about human weakness. She had studied the recording of the first battle 1,000 times. She had watched the human ship absorb energy and redirect it as weapons. She had learned everything she could about her enemy. "The humans have one advantage," she told her officers. "Their ship can absorb our weapons and use our power against us. So we will attack in waves. We will keep firing until their absorption systems overload. No ship can eat infinite energy. Eventually, they will choke." Her officers nodded. The plan made sense. Overwhelm the enemy with sheer numbers. It was simple, but simple plans often worked best. The Purification Armada jumped to the human system on a bright morning. 2,000 ships appeared in the sky above the colony like a swarm of crystal locusts. The colonists looked up and saw their sun blocked out by the sheer number of enemy vessels. Many fell to their knees and prayed. Captain Vasquez was on the bridge when the Armada arrived. Her sensor officer called out the numbers in a voice that could not hide its fear. 2,000 ships, 12 planet crackers, the Eternal Crystalline. "They brought their whole empire," her first officer said quietly. "They really want us dead." Vasquez nodded slowly. She had expected this. She had hoped it would not come to this, but she had expected it. "Begin protocol Prometheus preparation," she said. "Stage 1 only. We will see if we can convince them to leave without using it." Deep in the ship, engineers began the process of unlocking the thing that lived in the reactor core. They worked with steady hands despite the fear in their hearts. They had all volunteered for this mission knowing that Protocol Prometheus might be their only option. On the main screen, the Persistence began to change. The crew of the Velthari Armada watched in confusion as the human ship transformed before their eyes. Hull segments unfolded outward, revealing systems that had been hidden inside. Weapon ports opened across its surface. The ugly 400-meter vessel stretched and grew until it was nearly a kilometer long. It was still tiny compared to the Armada, but it was no longer the same ship that had won the first battle. It was something more. Supreme Commander Yethanara felt a cold chill run through her body. "What are these humans?" she whispered. A communication request appeared on her screen. She accepted it. Captain Vasquez looked older than she had 3 months ago. There were more lines on her face and more gray in her hair, but her eyes were the same. Cold steel that showed no fear. "You brought your whole empire to kill one ship," Vasquez said. "I am almost flattered." Yethanara kept her voice steady. "Surrender now. Hand over your vessel for study. Accept Dominion rule over your colony. If you do these things, I will spare your people. You have my word, your word?" Vasquez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The Dominion has enslaved 43 species across your territory. You have completely destroyed 17 others. Entire civilizations erased because they would not bow to you. Your word means nothing." Yethanara's claws tightened on the arms of her chair. "Do not lecture me about history, human. Your species is young. You do not understand how the galaxy works." "I understand enough." Vasquez leaned forward. "I understand that you could leave right now. Take your ships and go home. Build your empire somewhere else. Leave humanity alone. This is your last chance." "Your last chance," Yethanara corrected. "Surrender or die." Vasquez was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was sad. "I really hoped you would be smarter than this," she said. "I really hoped I would not have to show you what this ship was actually built for." The transmission ended. Yethanara gave the order to attack. 2,000 ships opened fire at once. The Persistence moved. It flowed through the Armada like water flowing through rocks. It was too fast to track with sensors, too unpredictable to hit. Its weapons fired constantly, carving lines of destruction through the enemy fleet. But this time, Vasquez was not trying to disable ships. She was trying to survive. There were simply too many enemies. The Persistence could not be everywhere at once. Shots began to land. Shields flickered and failed. The absorption matrices overloaded exactly as Yethanara had predicted. Hull breaches appeared across the human ship. Crew members died at their stations. Fires broke out in compartments throughout the vessel. "We have them," Yethanara shouted. "Concentrate all fire on the human ship. Do not let them escape." A graviton beam from the Eternal Crystalline caught the Persistence directly. The human ship was slammed backward, spinning out of control. Antimatter torpedoes followed, hundreds of them, smashing into the weakened hull. The Persistence went dark. Its lights went out. Its engines died. It drifted through space like a dead thing, trailing smoke and debris. The Armada cheered. Officers embraced each other. Some wept with joy. They had done it. They had killed the nightmare that had humiliated their people. Yethanara allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The human captain had been brave, but bravery was not enough against overwhelming force. The galaxy would remember this day as the day that Dominion proved its superiority once and for all. Then the Persistence moved again. It should not have been possible. Every sensor showed the human ship was dead. No power, no life signs, no activity at all, but it moved anyway. Captain Vasquez stood alone in the reactor room. Her crew had evacuated at her order. Only she remained, her hand pressed against the door that held back the thing inside. "Protocol Prometheus," she said clearly. "Full activation." The door opened. What came out was not energy. It was not radiation. It was not anything the Velthari had words for. Humanity had discovered it 20 years ago, in a place between dimensions where nothing should exist. A piece of something that had died before the universe was born. A fragment of a god's heart. Still beating after billions of years, they had contained it barely. They had studied it carefully. They had built a ship around it because it was too dangerous to put anywhere else, and they had named that ship Persistence, because that was what humanity did. They persisted. They survived. They never gave up. Even when facing things that should not exist, the god's heart woke fully for the first time since being captured. The persistence. Unfolded, what emerged was not a ship anymore. It was a structure of impossible angles and geometry that existed in more dimensions than three. It hurt to look at. It made Velthari officers scream and cover their eyes. It bent reality around itself like a stone bending the surface of water supreme. Commander Yethanara watched her sensors try to understand what they were seeing. Numbers scrolled across screens in patterns that made no sense. "What dimension is that thing operating in?" she asked in a voice barely louder than a whisper. Her science officer was shaking. "At least 7, maybe more." "Commander, our weapons exist in three-dimensional space. We cannot hit something that exists outside our reality." The persistence spoke then, not through communication channels. Directly into every mind in the fleet, the Dominion has committed crimes across 3,000 systems, it said in Captain Vasquez's voice. Slavery, genocide, the extinction of entire species. Today, there is a reckoning. Yethanara felt something she had never felt before in her long military career. She felt afraid, that transformed. Persistence hung in space like something from a nightmare. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Its angles shifted constantly, moving in ways that three-dimensional eyes could not follow. Energy rippled across its surface in colors that had no names. Supreme Commander Yethanara tried to maintain control. She was a warrior who had won 100 battles. She had never retreated in her life. She would not start now. "All ships, open fire," she commanded. "Everything we have, now." The eternal crystalline unleashed its full arsenal. Every weapon system fired at once. The power of 100 suns poured toward the impossible shape that had been a human warship. The beams passed through the persistence without touching it. They continued on through empty space and struck Velthari ships on the other side. 6 escort vessels died instantly, killed by friendly fire because their weapons could not hit an enemy that existed. Outside normal space, Yethanara watched in horror as her own flagship murdered her own people. "Ceasefire," she said quietly. "Cease fire." The armada went silent. 2,000 ships floated motionless, waiting to see what would happen next. The persistence reached out, not with weapons, with something worse. Reality itself bent around the eternal crystalline. The massive flagship did not explode. It simply began to come apart. Its matter converted to energy in perfect sequence, like a crystal sculpture dissolving in acid. The crew had exactly enough time to understand what was happening before they stopped existing. 200,000 Velthari officers, the best of their military, gone in an instant. Yethanara was not aboard the Eternal Crystalline. She had transferred to a smaller command ship to coordinate the final assault. That decision saved her life. She watched her flagship die and felt something break inside her. "Fleet retreat," she ordered. Her voice was empty. "All ships fall back to Dominion space." But the persistence was not finished. It vanished from normal space. Not like before, with jumps that sensors could track. This time it simply stopped existing in one place and started existing in another. It appeared above the Velthari homeworld for exactly 1.7 seconds. When it left, the planet's orbital defense grid was gone. Every satellite, every weapons platform, every station, all of it converted to dust. The persistence appeared above the main Velthari shipyards. E-date C seconds. The shipyards ceased to exist. Half-finished warships and the workers building them, all gone. It appeared above the military academies where the next generation of Dominion officers was being trained. E-date C seconds. Empty ground where buildings had stood moments before. It appeared above the Palace of Crystals, where the Dominion ruling council had met for 10,000 years. E-date C seconds. The heart of the empire was erased from existence. Jump after jump after jump. Each one destroying something critical to the Dominion's ability to make war. Communication hubs, fuel depots, weapons factories, research facilities, the The Persistence moved faster than any ship could follow, faster than any warning could travel. By the time Velthari commanders learned one target had been destroyed, 3 more were already gone in 17 minutes. 10,000 years of military infrastructure became dust, scattered across 1,000 star systems. The Persistence returned to the colony. It was smaller now, folded back into something that almost looked like a normal ship, but it was clearly damaged. Its hull was cracked in a dozen places. Energy fluctuated wildly across its surface. Whatever it had done had cost it dearly. Captain Vasquez appeared on every Velthari screen in the Armada. She looked terrible. Her face was pale and drawn. Her eyes were bloodshot. She had aged 20 years and 17 minutes, but her voice was still steady. "Your empire is over," she said. "Your slave worlds are being liberated by coalition forces as I speak. Your military infrastructure is gone. You have nothing left except the ships in front of me." She paused to let her words sink in. "You can accept this. You can go home and rebuild your civilization as something better. Something that does not enslave other species. Something that does not destroy entire races because they refuse to bow. You can learn from this and become something worthy of the stars." Her eyes hardened. "Or you can try again. And you should know that humanity has 12 more ships like this one. My colleagues are not known for mercy. I am considered soft by comparison." The surviving Velthari ships floated in silence. Over 1,000 vessels remained, enough to devastate 100 worlds. But they had just watched a single ship unmake everything their empire had built. They had watched the eternal crystalline dissolve like morning frost in sunlight. No one moved. No one spoke. No one dared to be the first to suggest continuing the fight. Supreme. Commander Yethanara stared at the human ship for a long time. She thought about her training. She thought about Dominion honor. She thought about the oath she had sworn to never surrender. Then she thought about her children at home. She thought about the young officers who had signed up to serve because they believed in the Dominion's greatness. She thought about all the lives that would end if she chose pride over wisdom. "All ships," she said slowly, "stand down. We will return to Dominion space and await further orders." Captain Vasquez nodded once. "Smart choice." The transmission ended. The Velthari Armada turned and began the long journey home. They did not fire another shot. They did not make threats. They simply left, broken in spirit, if not in body. Yethanara sat alone in her command chair as her ship carried her toward a future she could not imagine. The Dominion had existed for 10,000 years. It had seemed eternal, unchangeable, forever. Now it was gone. It ended in less than 20 minutes by a single ugly ship. She would spend the rest of her life wondering how it had happened. How her people had grown so confident in their own superiority that they could not see the danger until it was too late. How they had mocked a ship that contained the power to unmake reality itself. The human captain had tried to warn them. She had asked them to leave peacefully. She had given them every chance to walk away. They had laughed at her behind the retreating fleet. The Persistence drifted slowly in orbit around the colony it had protected. Inside the ship, medical teams rushed to treat the wounded and retrieve the dead. 300 crew members had died during the battle. Another 200 were injured. Captain Vasquez sat in a medical bay while doctors ran scans on her brain. Protocol Prometheus required a human mind to interface directly with the god's heart. That interface had consequences. "You have extensive neural damage," the chief medical officer said quietly. "The connection burned through pathways that cannot be repaired." "I am sorry, Captain." Vasquez nodded. She had known this was possible. She had known it might kill her. "How long?" she asked. The doctor hesitated. "Hours? Maybe a day. There is nothing we can do." Vasquez closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she was calm. "Help me get to the observation deck," she said. "I want to see the colony one more time." They helped her into a wheelchair and brought her to the largest window on the ship. Below, the planet turned slowly. Cities glittered with lights. Ships came and went from the spaceport. Life continued. 2 million people down there owed their lives to her and her crew. 43 enslaved species across the former Dominion were being freed at this very moment. 17 nearly extinct civilizations would finally get justice. It had been worth it. She watched the planet turn and waited for the end. Her crew gathered around her, the ones who could walk, holding her hands and speaking quiet words of gratitude and love. She had been a captain for 30 years. She had commanded ships across a dozen star systems. But this crew, these 847 people who had volunteered for a suicide mission, were the finest she had ever served with. Was it enough? She asked softly, her voice fading. Did we do enough? Her first officer squeezed her hand. You ended an empire that had tortured the galaxy for 10,000 years. You saved millions of lives. You showed everyone that humanity does not abandon its people. Vasquez smiled faintly. Good, she whispered. That is good. And then she was gone. The Velthri Dominion surrendered unconditionally 3 days after the battle. There was no one left to negotiate, no council to debate, no military to resist. The infrastructure that had held their empire together for 10,000 years had been erased in 17 minutes. Captain Elena Vasquez did not live to see the surrender. She died 16 hours after the battle ended, surrounded by her crew. Watching the colony she had saved turn slowly beneath her ship. Her last words became famous across the galaxy. Was it enough? The answer, everyone agreed, is yes. Coalition forces moved quickly to liberate the 43 species the Dominion had kept as slaves. Some had been in chains for thousands of years. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. Many did not believe it was real at first. They thought it was a trick, another cruel game their masters were playing. When they finally understood that the Dominion was truly gone, the celebrations lasted for weeks. Planets that had known only oppression suddenly blazed with light and music. People danced in streets that had never seen joy. Children learned to smile for the first time in generations. The 17 species the Dominion had nearly destroyed were given special protection and support. Their populations were tiny now, scattered across a handful of worlds. But they were alive. They had survived. And now they had a chance to rebuild. The Velthri themselves were not punished with genocide. Humanity insisted on that. Captain Vasquez had said it clearly in her final message. They could rebuild as something better. They could learn from their fall and become worthy of the stars. Some Velthri accepted this chance. They looked at what their empire had done and felt shame. They worked alongside the species they had once enslaved, trying to make amends for centuries of cruelty. It was not easy. Forgiveness was slow to come. But they kept trying. Other Velthri could not let go of their pride. They formed resistance movements and dreamed of restoring the Dominion to its former glory. These groups grew smaller every year as new generations were born who did not remember the old ways. Eventually, they faded into history. Angry old men telling stories no one wanted to hear. The persistence itself was never repaired. The dimensional technologies activated during Protocol Prometheus could not be safely contained again. The god's heart that had powered its transformation was too dangerous to move or manipulate. Engineers who tried to study it reported headaches, nightmares, and the feeling of being watched. The ship was towed to a stable point in space near Earth's moon and left there. Over time, it became a memorial. A massive structure was built around it, a museum dedicated to the battle that had ended an empire and freed billions of souls. Every year, millions of visitors came to see the persistence. They walked through exhibits that told the story of Captain Vasquez and her crew. They saw the ugly gray hull with its welded patches. They read the names of the 300 crew, members who had died in the final battle, and they watched a holographic recording of Captain Vasquez, explaining why the ship had been built the way it was. Pretty. Ships get destroyed first, the hologram said. Standing on a recreation of the Persistence's bridge, enemies look at a beautiful warship and see a threat. They shoot it before it can shoot them. But an ugly ship? They look at it and laugh. They think it is weak. They think it is old. They underestimate it. She smiled in the recording. It was a real smile, warm and genuine, made years before the final battle, when she still had hope that war could be avoided. Being underestimated is the greatest advantage in combat. Let your enemy laugh. Let them point and make jokes, and then let them learn the truth too late.
The hologram faded.
Visitors stood in silence, thinking about what they had seen and heard. Outside the museum, the real Persistence floated in its cradle of support structures. Its hull was still cracked from the battle. Its lights were still dark. But there was something about it that made people feel safe. Something that said humanity would always have protectors like this. Ugly ships crewed by stubborn people who never gave up. 50 years after the battle, the Galactic Council was formed. It included humans, reformed Velthari, and representatives from every species that had once been enslaved. They met on a space station built specifically for diplomacy, a chamber that looked out on the stars. Their first act was to create a unified defense doctrine. Never again would a single empire be allowed to enslave others. Never again would species stand alone against threats too large to face. They would work together, protect each other, and build a galaxy worth living in. The preamble to their charter quoted Captain Vasquez's words, "The universe is vast and full of terrors. Build ugly ships. Fill them with stubborn people. And never stop fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves." A century later, the story of the Persistence had become legend. Children grew up hearing about Captain Vasquez and her crew. They played games where they pretended to be human warships facing down impossible odds. They dressed in gray uniforms with patches sewn on to look like welded metal. Some species began calling humans the persistent ones. It was meant as a compliment. Humans did not have the longest history in the galaxy. They were not the most technologically advanced. They were not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but they never gave up. They never surrendered. They never abandoned their people, no matter the cost. The Velthari had learned that lesson too late. Others had learned it by watching. Across the galaxy, the message spread, "Do not threaten humanity. Do not attack their colonies. Do not harm their friends, because somewhere in the void, ugly ships were always watching." Ships crewed by men and women who had sworn to protect the innocent. Ships that carried weapons too. It's terrible to imagine. Ships that persisted. The memorial at the moon drew visitors from every corner of known space. They came to pay respect to Captain Vasquez and her crew. They came to see the ship that had changed history. They came to understand why humanity was different from all the other. Young species reaching for the stars. At the center of the museum, there was a simple plaque with Vasquez's final words carved into metal. Was it enough? Below it, someone had added a single line. It was more than enough. Thank you. The Persistence hung silent in its eternal orbit, monument to sacrifice and stubborn courage. Its war was over. Its crew had earned their rest. But the ship remained, a reminder to all who looked upon it. Humanity had built this ugly thing out of desperation and hope. They had crewed it with volunteers who knew they might never come home. They had sent it to face an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years. And when that empire laughed at them, they had ended it. The stars were safer now because of what Captain Elena Vasquez and her crew had done. Free species thrived where slaves had once suffered. Children grew up without fear of Dominion raids. The galaxy was healing, slowly. From wounds that had seemed eternal, all because one ugly ship had refused to die. All because 847 stubborn humans had stood against impossible odds and said, "No further. This is what we do."